Vernomatic Productions.
Are you ready?
Live from the Metal Mayhem Studios in Rochester, New York.
We are gold.
And heard around the world by metalheads just like you. This is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Heavy metal music.
Your weekly dose of metal music, interviews, album reviews, news, and more. Want to be part of the show? Send us a message through our website, metalmayhemroc.com, or hit us up on Facebook and Twitter. Search Metal Mayhem ROC, a proud member of the Pantheon podcast team.
It's getting nice and heavy.
And now, welcome tonight's host, John the Vernomatic Verno.
Good evening, everybody. As always, Thursday nights, new content drops. September's here, the NFL's back tonight, and we're here with a really cool interview. Tonight's episode, we welcome Brittany Chapman onto the show. Now, Brittany, she's the daughter of the late, great Paul Chapman from UFO and Wasted fame. Well, she just so happens to be friends with our very own Southern Cal and his wife, Heidi. About 2-3 weeks ago, Southern Cal and Heidi and Brittany met up at the Quiet Riot show up in Cocoa Beach, Florida. And little did they know that their good friend Brittany Chapman just so happened to be the daughter of Paul Chapman. It's a cool connection, and you'll hear all about it in the interview. That's coming up in just a second. But first, I want to remind you to join our community by getting up to that metalmayhemroc.com website and sign up for our weekly newsletter. This is our chance to stay in touch with you surrounding new podcast episodes, reminders for our Monday night live radio show on Metal Devastation Radio, or any other content that we put out there. Have it be our new YouTube channel or blog posts that we do, CD reviews. It's all up there at metalmayhemroc.com. Recent shows. Last week we had Udo Dirkschneider, his new solo album, Touchdown. He was here talking about that release. A couple weeks ago, we had Adam Dubin, the filmmaker, who's worked with Metallica in his very own project, Murder in the Front Row. That story about the San Francisco thrash scene. And a couple weeks earlier, we had Stefan Chirarzy and Renee Richardson of the Met Report podcast. So again, get up to that metalmayhemroc.com website, join our community, check out some of these past shows. There's about 165 episodes up there. Rate, subscribe, and review all these. That really helps. So let me get my brother in metal from South Florida. He goes by the name Southern Cal. Cal, what's going on, man? How are you?
Doing good, Vern. I'm doing real good. Looking forward to this Brittany Chapman podcast release. What an adventure that was, and went well beyond what I was expecting. The living Chapman, growing up Chapman.
Cal, let me ask you, give me 1 or 2 or 3 examples of little teasers on this interview that the listeners could look forward to.
Well, you're going to find out when Brittany would wake up in the morning, who'd be sleeping on the couch, what different band, sleeping on the couch, sleeping on the floor, maybe on a lazy chair out by the poolside. Just some good stuff there. And the fact that Paul, got to see a lot of pictures, and that in every picture, except for if he was hugging his daughter at his wedding, the guy's carrying a guitar around and constantly jamming. He's grilling and jamming, partying and jamming, swimming and jamming, all in one. It was just, what a great informative story from Brittany. Growing up Chapman.
Growing up Chapman. It's the only way we could title it. So that's what we have tonight. But quickly, up here at Metal Mayhem ROC, we are really putting some emphasis on our YouTube channel. And we do a lot of content on there that may not make it onto the podcast. Cal, quickly tell us about what you're involved with in the latest project that you've been working on.
Everybody's heard of Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth. Well, Vern, we got a new series. We've teamed up with Online Metal Promo to promote some of these bands that they're involved with. These are all bands like Seven Train, Love and War, EOG, Santa Escuridad, which is an all-Spanish band, which you should check out. You'll love it. To bring some spotlight onto these bands. They're all working hard. Some have been around for a few years. Some are just getting started. Some are just looking for that one break that might just push them over the edge.
Yeah, I agree. And Ben over at Online Metal Promo, the roster of bands he has on there are the bands that we subscribe to. They're like more in line with the traditional heavy metal bands, straight ahead guitars and, solid vocals. And these bands have history. Like, what's this band you're talking about? The Santa Diego?
Santa. It's Larry Berrigan from Hellstar. This is one of his side projects. One of their things that's a big scene that's kind of building momentum in the Houston area. All Spanish, sung in Spanish. I believe all the members of this band are of Hispanic descent, and it's just something very different. But it jams. It jams, and it's when you find little nuggets like this out there, it gives you faith that the metal scene is still alive.
It's alive and kicking. So again, Southern Cal, he has a series up on the Metal Mayhem ROC YouTube channel. Get up to our website. I redesigned it. There's just a big, huge action button that will get you to YouTube. Good work on that, Cal.
Thanks, Ron.
So let's get into this. Growing up Chapman, Brittany Chapman, the story of a rock and roll daughter. For my co-host, Southern Cal, I'm the Vernomatic. This is Metal Mayhem ROC. Tonight's show, we have a fun one. We're going down to Southern Cal's turf down in South Florida, Melbourne area, and we have a new friend of the show. Her name's Brittany Chapman. She's a 37-year-old metalhead, and she's got some heavy metal roots in the family. She's the daughter of the late, great Paul Chapman of UFO fame, Wasted, and several other acts. Brittany, welcome to Metal Mayhem ROC. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. This was great.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Like to reintroduce you to your buddy, Southern Cal.
Hey.
Great seeing you the other night. Quiet Riot.
Yeah, that was fun. They were awesome.
Yes, ma'am. They fucking rock.
Yeah, they were so good.
Southern Cal, he's our South Florida correspondent. He told me he was going to the Quiet Riot show. So I'm hanging out, watching a little YouTube, just relaxing, and Cal sending me pictures. And he sends me this picture of these two really good-looking girls. One's Cal's wife, and the other one was Brittany. And the caption said, "Here's Heidi with Brittany Chapman, Paul Chapman's daughter." I'm like, what? How is this flying under the radar? So as it turns out, Paul retired in his later years to South Florida. He was living there. Southern Cal has his restaurant, and he's been living down there over 30 years. And I guess Heidi and Brittany are BFFs. So you know what? What we're going to do tonight, Brittany, is we're going to talk about your relationship with your father, you growing up Chapman. That's what we're billing it as. And just the stories of growing up with your father, but more importantly, the outreach of the rock and roll community that played with your father for well over 40 plus years. It's truly amazing. So once again, condolences on the passing of your father. I've lost my dad. Southern Cal's lost his father. So it's always cool to, revisit, if you will, just a little bit. I'm going to let Cal take over and navigate this. We're going to have some fun with it. So, John, go ahead.
Well, again, Brittany, welcome to the show. Like we said, we ran into each other at the Quiet Riot show. I was blown away at the way you talked about your father. Passion and love. It was really, like I told you, this is why I wanted to sit down and talk to you about things. Not only to get to know, as our fans would like to know more about Paul from the UFO, but growing up Chapman, two different views. I would view Paul as a rock and roll star in UFO, where you didn't really know that, you said, until after he had passed away, that you didn't realize how famous he was. So your eyes were just, it's the daughter looking at the father. This is my dad. This isn't Paul the shredder.
Yeah.
This is Paul the dad who's taken me to Meg O'Malley's or over to Frankie's or, wherever, Disney World.
Yeah.
This is Paul the dad. So talk to us about how you didn't really realize how famous your father was until after his passing.
So growing up, it was the normalcy to me and the complete abnormalcy to everybody else of my childhood. It's mind-boggling because it was like, oh, that's not normal, having a rock star dad, but you didn't see him as a rock star. he was a family man. If he could have had 20 kids, he would have, but he was a big family man. He loved to gather people. He was constantly hosting parties at the house on the weekends. There was people in and out of the house, and a lot of them were famous people that I didn't know were famous people because they're just people, and you don't see the icons that you see on stage as just people. But, so these people are just, when Pete Way spent 2 weeks at the house, it was just like, oh, it's crazy Uncle Pete.
Right.
And
a lot of uncles in the family.
Well, I mean, it was wild. But after, I started to know when the internet really started to peak, like MySpace times, when everybody started getting on the MySpace pages, he started a fan page. And that's where he was really active with his fans. And I would go on there and read some of his stories and stuff, but it still didn't click. And then, I think the biggest one was when the whole Ozzy tour came up. I believe it was the Diary of a Madman tour. And he had a big poster in the house. And once you start to realize that the Osbournes came out with the reality show on TV. So then it's like, oh, well, my dad played with him, and then it was like oh, okay, that's cool. But then after he passed and the people that reached out to me, it was like, what? You're finding a way to contact me to send condolences of your friend to, you know what I mean? But I'm looking at this person as when I got the text message from Phil Campbell of Motorhead, my mouth dropped.
Oh, then, yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, it's Phil, and he was so sweet and talking to, Phil and all of those people. And then the people that reached out from all over the world, like people in Japan, people in China, people in, well, not really China, but Japan was one of his favorite places to tour. And so people reaching out, I had to get translators. I was on the phone with people in different countries. I had to have a planner to where I could coordinate because of the time differences. It was extremely chaotic, but it helped me grieve a lot more hearing these stories of,
Sure.
And every single person that I talked to, every single one, he was a great man. He was a loyal friend to everybody. He was a bright energy. He was a beautiful being of light, if you will.
Let me stick this in there real quick. You mentioned him liking to have the parties on the weekends and the dinner parties. Well, I talked to our mutual friend, Nicole.
Oh, yeah.
And she told me her first meeting of your father was at one of these dinners,
mm-hmm.
and how he would like to always announce that dinner will be ready at 6. And Nicole said, I don't think that ever happened once. It was usually 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
And then in her best English accent, she said, when your father said, you're so small, you could fit right under my armpits. And you put an arm around her, and sure enough, again, just here's Paul the dad, not the rock star, Paul the dad, just being a friend to his daughter's friend, and just the regular guy that he was, that everybody, he just happened to play guitar for UFO. So it was a nice story from Nicole.
And I can see that whole scene because Nicole's face when he stuck her head in his armpit, she was like, oh, because he had been cooking all night. So he always wore tank tops and he would be sweating, but we had amps in the kitchen. We had guitar amps in the dining room. We had a drum kit in the dining room at one time. So in between his cooking, he would perform. We're just like, can you hurry up? We're starving. And then that's how it was almost every weekend. Every weekend was a party. So as we started to get older and our friends were able to drive, we would all drive to my dad's house and sit there and watch him play and cook. And it was some of the best experiences of a lot of people's memories with him. And then learning after his passing, he was the cook on the road. He loved to cook for everybody when they were on the road. And there was a time where they didn't have any money. And I believe it was Andy Parker told me this story of when he stole a bunch of food from a grocery store and a bottle of scotch. So they had a crock pot on the road, and he just grabbed a bunch of stuff he could throw in the crock pot and a bottle of scotch, and they were fine. But he wanted to take care of people. He had a very nurturing spirit of taking care of everybody, but also having that main character energy of, well, I can make a great curry. That was his famous dish. And I can also rip on the guitar while I'm stirring the curry. And that's what he did. And that was normal for me. It was normal for everybody.
You mentioned, you just said that he is very nurturing. That leads me to my next question. Correct me if I'm wrong. Paul had 4 marriages?
Yeah.
So, yeah, tell us a little bit about, well, your mother and your family chapter, but the other mothers, how is all that?
It was wonderful. My mom was wife number 2, and she had 2 kids with him, but she also had a son, and my dad had a son before they were together. So my mom is actually the real goat of the whole story. She moved to another country with him, had his kids while he went on tour, took care of all of us in a 2-bedroom flat in the UK, not knowing anybody, not knowing anything. She was 26 years old. My dad was 28. So my mom, I think of the Wind Beneath My Wings song. He was always front and center. My mom was in the shadows, but she was the one taking care of all of everything. Because there's behind every great man, there's a badass woman. Yeah. Her breaking point with my dad was waking up, getting the kids ready for school, and all the roadies from Poison were passed out drunk on the floor. And she was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't. I got kids to get ready for school. You've got your friends over that are passed out on the floor. But my parents stayed very, very close for the sake of the kids. And so she had a relationship with every wife after the next 2 wives. So wife number 3, her name was Terry. And they were together for about 12, 13 years. And she was great. She was a great, they owned a guitar shop together. He was doing guitar lessons in a studio downtown Melbourne. And so she would do guitar repairs and he would do lessons. And so they, I actually don't even really know what happened during that whole situation. I just remember it being like, okay, we're done. And it was very odd. But then he remarried Debbie, and they were together for 18 years. And Debbie was a flute player. She played the flute. She could play the cello. She could read music. She was very musical. She's super smart. She was great. She was a great stepmother to me as well. I've been very blessed with the wives that my dad has chosen, because everybody got along and there was no animosity, no drama. Even if it was split holidays, my mom would spend the holidays with us, and and it was a very loving family. We were all one big family.
What about siblings?
So he has a son named Tice. Tice lives in the UK. And my mom has a son, Bobby, who I was telling you about. Tice and Bobby are my older brothers, obviously my half brothers. And then my parents had my brother Sean and I together. But then Terry had a son and Debbie has a daughter. So I had step siblings constant. Having a lot of siblings meant the house was never calm.
The Brady Bunch.
It was extremely chaotic, but it was normal. Chaos was so normal, which is wild because I talk to people and I tell them things and they're like, okay. All right, that's fine.
Did your siblings and step siblings, did they have their own unique relationship with their fathers, as looking up to your father as the rock star, if you will? Or were they just disenchanted with that? Because, you're a rocker, but maybe they weren't into it.
Oh, they were. They all were. My brother Tice is a drummer. My brother Bobby plays bass. My brother Sean and I never really got into playing anything. I like we spoke. I like to know about music knowledge. I guess that's from all the storytelling in my life. Yeah. But they've been musically inclined with, different, Bobby likes to play everything. And I couldn't pick what music I liked until I was older, because it was constant metal in the house between, one brother's jamming Anthrax in one room, one's going through the grunge stage in the other room. And, I'm, I'm like, I wasn't allowed to like anything. Like I couldn't listen to the music. They'd come in and turn it off. I remember I got a Sheena Easton CD, and that was that I was allowed to play that. My brothers were kind of ruthless when it came to me putting music on.
That's awesome that there was such a, 4 marriages and your father, and it's a testament to his soul that, these are just relationships. And isn't that what life is?
Absolutely.
It sounds like what you're saying. It was just moving on. He wasn't ending relationships. He was just adding to the Chapman legacy, if you will. So
I was very fortunate with that, because every people that I talk to that come from divorced families don't ever get blessed with anything like that, so everybody, Debbie did pass away a year before my dad did. And that was really, really hard, to see him go through a heartbreak like that. Because you see him as a superior, as a superhero, as and when you see somebody so vulnerable and broken, it killed me to see, because there was no way I could help heal him at all, so that was a rough patch, but getting to know him as Tonka has been amazing. It really has.
It was a Tonka truck, right? Is that how that nickname started?
So I've heard 3 stories, and there's so many times where I just am like, I wish I could call him and ask him, because now I'm hearing things. A lot of people are restricting on what they tell me too, because he was wild. He was big into the drugs and booze. I mean, all of UFO was, from what I've heard. They were crazy rock and roll, partiers. So he was one of the hardest ones, that he was indestructible. They called him Tonka. But I heard one person gave him the name. I heard somebody else gave him the name. So I don't know exactly, but in 2015, so when I was born, it was when he was with Wasted, and they did a tour after I was born, and then he moved to Florida. So I never got to experience at older wise, him being gone, or he was always there, but my brothers got to, when he was on tour with UFO or doing this, they got to have that whole experience of getting to go backstage at Judas Priest, getting to go backstage at Motley Crue, because that was where he was at the peak touring with them. Mm-hmm. And then, sometimes when my brothers tell me stories, I'm like, I didn't get any of that, but I got the best part. I got him fully focused on family care, as opposed to being gone, touring, working, basically, but my brothers got to experience a lot of cool things when they were younger with different rock stars. And I would get a little envious, but then I'm like, nope, I'm glad I got the relaxed Tonka.
Well, you were born in 1986, so, you're late to the party.
I was really late.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? And honestly, when did Pops join UFO? 80, 81? Well, he played with them earlier, but he started recording.
78 to 83.
Yeah. And that's another thing, too, we were talking about. He didn't play a lot of UFO at home growing up. A lot of his... I actually found a list I got to find somewhere, but of his top 12 most influential albums that. Oh man, it'd be a great list. Yeah, I'll find that for you. But Beatles, Pink Floyd, The Who, and then I was telling him Man was his favorite. And, depending on the nights, he'd get up in the middle of dinner and just start doing licks on the guitar because something popped in his head, and then he'd put on the Welsh Men's Choir and be like, everybody listen to how beautiful this song is. I'm like, this spaghetti's awesome.
Yeah, I know.
It's a great appreciation for music. The same way that people in Iron Maiden and Angel Witch and Def Leppard all looked at your father.
Oh, yeah.
You told a story about going backstage and Kurt Hammett being in awe of your father, and you in turn are sitting there looking at Kurt Hammett being enthralled with Kurt Hammett. It's the big circle there. So,
Brittany, quickly retell that story. You told it to me last night, and it was really a cool story.
He took me to 3 or 4 major concerts. Like, we saw Metallica and Godsmack, and I can't remember who else was on that tour. So we get backstage, and the security guard is like one person at a time. And I was underage, but I drank. So my dad's like, you guys wait here. I'm going to run back and, see what it's like back there. And I looked at the security guard and I said, no, I'm not going to wait right here. Do you know? And then I pulled that I'm Paul Chapman's daughter card. I never do that. Like, I'd never been like, hey. And I walked into the room and Kirk was shaking my dad's hand in like complete awe. And he was like, oh my God, Paul Chapman. And I'm like, and my dad's like, oh, that's my daughter who's not supposed to be here right now. And I was like, I don't listen to people. That, so I got to meet Kirk and talk to him. And he's like, your dad is a guitar god. He filled these shoes. And I'm just like, yeah, whatever, and I'm like, so you play for me. Oh God, holy shit, so it's been, I feel like also, after his passing, I've met a lot more of his celebrity friends more than he was around, which is a little sad, but he kind of kept to himself a lot more like throughout the later years. I mean, he would tell stories and I became so accustomed to listening to stories that like the reality of what he was actually saying now is like, oh, that was that guy. You know what I mean? Like he talked about him like they were just like friends, not that they were huge famous people or, big celebrities. They were buddies. And like, the first person I talked to was Phil Collen after he passed. Phil Collen was in Girl, and Girl did their first tour with UFO. So him and my dad clicked right away. And Phil I have pictures of Phil having Sunday dinner with my grandparents. Like, it's crazy. It's nuts. Like I've even sent it to him when I had to go through all my dad's stuff. I'm like, do you remember this? He's like, oh my gosh, your grandparents were such lovely people. And, and so when I was talking to Phil, he's just like, your dad was a great teacher for me. He taught me a lot. He taught us most of things not to do while on tour than what to do on tour. I knew my dad was not just a regular person just because like his personality was something like every weekend, because my parents had joint custody. So the weekends were for my dad's house. So the weekends were always a celebration just of life, just being alive. He loved to cook. I don't know if you saw it, but on YouTube, I threw a concert for him for his celebration of life. And I got a bunch of testimonials from like, Phil Campbell, Joe Elliott, Phil Collen, Johnny D from Doro, Eddie Trunk, huge UFO fan, super nice guy. Just a bunch of other people and some people from overseas that toured with him, also. You can look it up. It's the Paul Chapman Celebration of Life on YouTube. It's been a wild ride, actually, after he passed, because like you said, everybody's got a story. I have talked to so many people, and one lady even came up to me. She's like, do you remember me? I'm like, no. And she's like, I used to babysit you when your dad would play at that bar. And I'm like, how old was I? Oh, I was 3. Yeah, no, I don't remember you.
Like your father, his heroes, like you said, Pink Floyd, the Stones, the Beatles, because he was a kid when they were young and in their prime. And Kurt, he was the same way, looking up to your dad, right? Where young bands now look up to the Metallicas. It's just that's one constant that always happens. You mentioned something about how it's been the outpour of the rock community that's been reaching out to you. Let's touch on some of that. Some of these people that have reached out to you where you're like, well, wait a second. Joe Elliott of Def Leppard. I didn't even know my dad knew Joe Elliott of Def Leppard. And here he is calling you to send his condolences.
I met Def Leppard when I was 15 with them, but my dad brought 15 people. It wasn't like you can bring like your family. My dad brought 15 people backstage at Def Leppard. So it was very quick, very fast. My dad and Steve were actually really good friends. Steve Clark that passed away and Phil. Yeah. But my brother actually trashed their room when he was 2. They were at a Def Leppard concert in like 1987 or 80. It was before I was born, or it was right after I was born. And they left him in the dressing room while they went and watched the show, a toddler. Okay. That's the rock and roll lifestyle, you know?
Hey, that's rock and roll.
Yeah.
That's rock.
And they came back and he trashed the room. And I mean, what else would a toddler do? So lucky he didn't get drunk.
Yeah.
And so when we were, 15, 16 years old, they remembered him. They're like, you little shit. Like, you were the kid that destroyed the room, and we were laughing about it. Still, it didn't click. Like, it did not click. And then after, the thing with the Joe Elliott situation was he was a fan of my dad before he was in UFO. He was a fan of my dad when he was in Lone Star, which was a band he was in like 1976, 75. I can't remember. There's been so many. But he used to hitchhike to go see my dad play. That was like, what?
Really?
Yeah. There was like all of these stories that come out. And like you said, the outpouring of people. I've talked to, the Def Leppard guys, all the guys from UFO have been really, really sweet. All of everybody in the music community that loved him and adored him have just been great keeping his legacy alive for me.
Talked about the outpouring and the people, we are very familiar with Billy Sheehan up here in Rochester, or up where Verno is, up in Rochester, New York. And he showed me a picture, as a matter of fact. Boy, he looked like 10 years old. I don't know.
Yeah, he was young.
Just a little kid. Talk about Billy a little bit.
Billy was amazing. He was super, super nice and very generous, taking the time, because there was a lot of people in line waiting to talk to him, and sharing his stories with me. Your dad was a great guy. He was full of love. Just everybody says the same thing. He was just such a good man to people. He was a good people person. And they bonded very well together. They kept in touch over the years, and thankful for social media, they were able to still keep in touch. And he told me the story about how my dad was too cheap to buy new pants, so he would duct tape over the groin area before a show every night. And he said then they all gather around to watch him take it off because it would be stuck to his junk, basically. Yep. But yeah, Billy was a really nice guy. And like, just when I told him, I sent him a picture of me and Rudy, and I was like, got to meet Rudy, and he's like, nice guy, good friend of mine. He's always, he'll check in and say, hey, how's it going? Or I followed his whole tour right now with Mr. Big, and they were in like Japan, and he was posting all of these. He's very active on Facebook. So I was, telling him, like, watching these sold out shows, like it makes me miss my dad, because there was a lot of projects in the works that he had going on that could have brought him out to do other things.
When he joined UFO, it was the prime time, like Biff Byford from Saxon said, where were you in 79 when the dam began to burst? Because that whole new wave of British heavy metal, it's kind of like the way Heidi was, my wife, when the grunge started. She was there at the beginning, but for us, me and the Vernomatic, we were there for the beginning of something that just was special. Your father was in UFO. At the time, you had Phil Mogg, Pete Way, Paul Raymond, who actually ended up leaving for one of the albums. They played as a 4-piece. And then the other long-timer, Andy Parker, who you mentioned earlier. These guys were just a great band, perfect timing for them. Like you said, your father replaced Michael Schenker at the time, who had just left the band. And I loved the 4 albums he was on. My first experience with the UFO album was the Mechanics album, your father's third album that he had performed with UFO. And just great stuff on there. Classic British new wave of heavy metal stuff on there. I would have loved to have been a 14-year-old kid over in, South London or whatever, just anywhere over there catching gigs at the Hammersmith.
That was my brother. Yeah. He got to do all of that stuff. And I'm like, but the thing is too, is like I'm looking through all of his pictures. My dad was huge on taking photographs and videos. I mean, there was a camera all the time and the disposable ones. So he would do triple or quadruple copies every time. So now I have all of these pictures. And what's crazy is I see a picture of Andy Parker making a face like, eh. And I text it to him and I go, you want to tell me what's wrong here? And he'll come up with this, he'll tell me the whole story behind the picture. And I'm like, wow, okay. And I told him last night that, I have a picture of Phil Collins and having Sunday dinner with my grandparents, and I get to
photo book that would be to look through that.
Oh yeah. And so like, I mean, even though my brothers got to experience all that cool stuff as a kid, like I'm completely reaping the benefits of being his kid now, meeting these people, hearing the stories, learning who he was as a person instead of a dad, like, a superhero rock star dad to me. And he loved the beach.
Well, I was going to ask you earlier, what made him want to move to this area, Melbourne, Florida?
So they were the tour with AC/DC that they did. One of the roadies from AC/DC had a place in Satellite Beach. So he convinced my dad to come here, and that's where it was like an apartment complex. So my mom was living there, and that's how my parents met. And my mom's from New Hampshire, like Boston, New Hampshire, all up north area there. So for her and him to be at the same place at the same time, and just she felt she's like, he was like my John Lennon. He had the accent, he played guitar. She didn't know who UFO was either. They had done, I think it was UFO, Cheap Trick, and it wasn't AC/DC. I cannot recall. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I'm fuzzy with all. I should start writing things down a lot more.
Man, what a sign of the times. A young UFO touring with a young AC/DC with Bon Scott and Rush and Cheap Trick. The 70s arena rock circuit was just insane. And then to top it off, this is pre-cell phones. So you have all these pictures that people take. And here it is, 30, 40 years later, you're finding these pictures. Just incredible sign of the times. Hey, listen, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Brittany's going to tell us what it was like for her father when he became a recording member of UFO and what his role was within the band. We'll be right back with Brittany Chapman, Growing Up Chapman.
Metal Mayhem ROC.
Metal. I'm Metalhead.
Metal Mayhem ROC is the home for metal from the very beginnings.
This is James DeBear from Hellstar. You're listening to Burn-O-Matic.
Dave Overkill from the Cleveland band Destructor. Hey, Dave, how are you?
I'm doing great. To longtime headliners.
Hey, this is Red Beach from Whitesnake.
Hey, this is Vinny Appice from Dio, Black Sabbath, and Last in Line.
To music of today.
Hi, this is Olaf Wickstrand from Enforcer.
Hi, this is Braun from Mastodon.
You're listening to Metal Mayhem ROC.
With John the Burn-O-Matic Burner.
Plus, we talk with producers and authors to give you behind-the-scenes info.
Hi, this is William Irwin, author of The Meaning of Metallica, Ride the Lyrics.
Greg Renoff, the author of the book Van Halen Rising and the Ted Templeman book, A Platinum Producer's Life in Music.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Metal Mayhem ROC, a proud member of the Pantheon podcast team, giving you more to listen for. Join our community, and always remember to keep it heavy.
Brittany, I wanted to just circle back a little bit about the UFO days, because even though your father started recording with them in 80 and 81, it was all the way back in the mid-70s where, honestly, he would fill in. He played with the band on tour. He replaced Michael Schenker on one of those Rush tours. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a recording member yet. Did you ever get privy to any conversation about, and I hate to put it this way, but the mid to late 70s UFO drama? He was almost treated as a pawn in all that.
A bit. I agree with that. There was times where he would talk about, certain situations where he felt a little alone in the band. There was the camaraderie of the band because everybody already had a bond and but he loved to play and he loved, he knew that they would have a big following. And like I said, I think, he had that main character energy to where, him and Michael are not the same. And like we discussed, I fight with people all the time on the internet about it. He wasn't the same and they were big shoes to fill. But my dad had a very bluesy style of playing and very, I don't want to say not careless, but he was very more free with it as opposed to being by the book, note for note, lick for lick. He kind of went off with it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen him just go and play and just go to another place in his mind. And it's just like, I'm sitting there watching his hands like, hello, are you okay?
Michael Schenker tells everybody this, that he doesn't like to listen to anybody so that he would never be influenced by anybody but himself. Now, when I listen to your father play, that stuff's coming from the heart. His soloing, his techniquing, it's one of a kind for sure.
Oh, yeah. And his favorite thing to do was gift you music. Like, I have songs that he's written for me that they're the best. He wrote me a song for my 6th birthday and slow danced with me in the kitchen to it and never forgot it because he had to hold me because my arms were like wrapped around his head and he had to hold me. And when I got married, we danced to it at my wedding. And then he did a couple of covers as well, Beatle covers. He loved to gift. Here's, Christmas, I would have CDs of stuff that he would mix and do in my stocking. Here's and stuff that I liked. Like, we loved the Beatles. He would play guitar and I would sing and he would record it. So I have all of these cassettes of us singing together that he saved. And it's awesome. And he's, I have to be loud because the chaos in the house, I was the loudest kid. And, so he's calling, we'd be singing. He's like, stop shouting, and he'd keep playing, stop shouting. Cause I'm like yelling into the microphone. He had everything. He had a whole studio set up. He built me a stage one time in the garage to perform on. He was just very big into, this is for you. This is for you. Give. And then take too. Anytime, someone would offer him something like when, do you want to play here? Do you want to do this? Do you want to join us? Take it up. He would take it all in. And I loved watching him play. He played for Gator Country, which were the Molly Hatchet guys.
Molly Hatchet, yeah.
Which was a whole, okay, so this is what we're doing now type thing because it was Southern rock.
How'd that come about? They're Northern Florida.
Jacksonville area, yeah.
West Side, Jacksonville.
I can't exactly remember. I know he was friends with, what was his name that passed away? The guitar player.
Dave LeBeck or Dwayne Holland.
Yep. They were buds. And he took over for Dwayne for a couple, they did a tour. And that was crazy too, because he hosted them at the house all the time. So we went from British rock stars to Southern bumpkins. So we had people over all the time, and they're telling stories about Skinner and this band and that band, and now it's all music all over again, but a whole other style. And
well, the funny thing with that was Molly Hatchet, but the brand name Molly Hatchet was touring with no original members. So if you wanted to go see Molly Hatchet, you had to go see Gator Country.
Gator Country.
Right.
I have one last question about the whole UFO thing.
Okay, yeah.
93. Well, UFO disbanded in, 83, 84, whenever that was. But then in 93, they started, getting the band back together. And Paul was supposed to be included, but at the last minute, they got Michael Schenker back. You know anything about that?
No, actually, I don't. The last thing, let's see, 3 years. So back in like 2017, my dad and Pete had thought about getting Wasted back together. And they were going to be doing a whole Wasted reunion. He had all of these plans. And I don't know. I mean, I know that in the 90s, like you said it was 93?
93-ish.
Yeah. Yeah, no, actually they came to Florida too, I believe. UFO did a tour where they did like 2 shows in Florida and he didn't go. And I'm not sure why. But he was still on great terms with everybody. I just don't know if it was an ego thing, with men, I guess, and rock stars, no offense. I don't know. I got to meet, I mean, obviously Pete was such a mess. And Phil, I got to meet them. Phil came down for, I think it was a week. And my dad got to take him to go see like a shuttle launch, up at the, Space Center. So that was cool when Phil was here. And I got to meet Phil, and I remember when I was younger, my dad used to wear Speedos because that's a very British thing. But as we started to get older, we were like, yeah, like, Dad, you can't wear that to the beach here. Like, people don't wear those here, So he stopped.
Not even at Playa Linda, they don't wear them even up there.
They don't wear anything up there. But so Phil was here, and I just remember being mortified that he was on the beach with us because he was in a Speedo. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm here with this guy. Like, Dad doesn't wear him anymore. And he's a freaking rock star. And I'm embarrassed because of what he's wearing. That was just, I don't know who the hell you are, but you need to cover up because I don't want to see that. That's how I was as a kid. I was so embarrassed. My dad had these ugly Speedos.
That explains those old Iron Maiden studio photos from the Bahamas.
That's Compass Point in the Bahamas.
Must be a British UK Wales thing.
There was a week where Finn from Wasted, the singer Wasted, was here. Pete was here, not Pete. It was Mike Gibbons from Badfinger. He was a drummer of Badfinger, but he lived in Orlando. And they spent a week at the house. No, it was Pete. We called it the lost week because I never once could understand anything that they said the whole time. My dad was very big into like medieval stuff. So one night they just were stumbling around hammered drunk and decided to knight people in the house with these huge swords. And I'm like, hi, 15-year-old daughter here. Let's not play with sharp objects while drinking, please. Right. So nobody listens to me. And Pete gets down on one knee, and my dad's got this sword, and he's, trying to knight him. And my friends are there. And, they're laughing because there's just a bunch of old British drunk guys that you can't understand a word they're saying playing with swords. So my friend gets on her knee, and Pete's like, I'm going to knight you. And I'm like, can you imagine that phone call as a parent? Like, sorry, we sliced your daughter's ear off because, we let a drunk rock star just put a knife to her face. But he fell a bunch. Pete was a stumbler, but he fell through my bedroom door while we were sleeping and was looking for something to help keep him awake. He was like, do you guys have any? And we were like, get out of the room. And he's like, I'm sorry. And then I heard my dad yelling at him for coming in the room while we were sleeping. And then here comes another, drunk rock star tumbling in. Do you know where the Pop-Tarts are? And I'm like, we don't know where the Pop-Tarts are. We just want to go to bed.
Rock and roll, yep. Right? Mm-hmm. Well, I want to talk about the elephant in the room here. Eddie Trunk. You talked to Eddie Trunk quite a bit. He was a great advocate for getting Rush, and amongst other people and other things too, but promoting and trying to get Rush into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Why the fuck is UFO not in the Hall of Fame?
I think it's bullshit. I think it's bullshit, honestly, because they have had 50 years. 50 years they toured, and regardless of who was in, who was out, that's a long friggin' time to keep going. Didn't they just do a 50-year anniversary? I believe they did.
And to still have two original members, Phil Mogg and Andy Parker.
And Neil Carter was there too, right? Wasn't Neil Carter on tour with them as well? I believe he was there. I don't know.
I think part of it is, one, because it's an American museum.
Okay.
And two, they weren't as popular in the States back in their heyday. I hate to say it, but, they were just a very heavily cult kind of band, even though they got tons of cred and all that. And the third thing is, it's a long time. The farther away it is, the less of the glow of the star. It's an uphill battle. Bands like Iron Maiden, UFO, I mean, Christ, Deep Purple and Rush, it was a struggle to get in there, where that's no-brainers. Then you get bands like Guns N' Roses, who it's a first-year eligibility entry off essentially one album. That's a whole nother story.
Well, and you know what? That's another thing in going back into the music community reaching out. He didn't personally reach out to me, but Slash did a tribute to my dad when he found out that he passed on his social media. And I was like, what? Slash? What? You do get those, I'll wear a UFO shirt out and I'll wear it to concerts where I know some people will know who they are. I went to Rockville in Daytona, and this guy just came running up to me and he's like, how do you know who they are? And I was like, well, that's my dad right here. I have Tonka tattooed on my arm here. So I was just like, yeah, that's my dad. And he was like, no way. And so he brought his buddy over, and his buddy's like, it's a festival that you can camp at. And he's like, we were setting up camp this morning and we were jamming UFO. I work in a dental office. I have dental patients. I'll play, music, and we'll talk about music. My favorite question to ask people is, what was your first concert? How old were you? And who did you go with? And the stories that people come up, I loved hearing about it. And one guy was like, oh, I saw a UFO in Cheap Trick, and I saw, I've met 3 people that have come into my office that are huge UFO fans. One guy came in and he was all excited in his new UFO shirt. It was Michael. He's like, look at my shirt. And I was like, oh, that's Michael. And he's like, oh, I didn't realize it. I'm like, it's okay.
We saw Wasted
with Iron Maiden.
You did?
Yeah, Peace of Mind tour.
I actually just found my Wasted shirt. This was the Save Your Prayers tour.
What year?
It doesn't say. Where was it?
It was Rochester, New York.
No, it's not on here.
Memorial Day? Was that Memorial Day Madness?
Labor Day.
Labor Day.
Yeah, this one was in March. I don't know what this tour, Save Your Prayers, maybe it was just the album. I'm not sure. I feel like Wasted was really more him. I heard a lot more Wasted growing up than I did UFO, if that does anything.
Good band.
I did an interview with this MTV producer, Brian Diamonds, and he told me the story that UFO replaced Ozzy in the Florida show when Randy Rhoads died.
Yeah, so I heard the story about that. My dad was actually supposed to take him to the dentist because he had a toothache. Apparently, the story was they were in, I believe, Lakeland. And yep. So my dad wasn't with them there, but he was with him 2 days before, and Randy had started to get a toothache. And my dad said, when we get to Florida, I'll go with you to the dentist. And then my mom picked my dad up from Melbourne Airport and had told him, because she had heard on the radio, that Randy had passed away. And she told my dad, and it ruined him for a bit. And they went out to eat to she picked him up at the airport. They went to a restaurant, and she said that people were trying to talk to him and, oh my gosh, you're here for the concert. And he didn't want to talk to anybody because obviously the news of that was, but he spoke very highly of Randy, of being just a very sweet kid. Basically, he was a kid. But when people started to pass away when we got older, like when Lemmy died, and I saw my dad grieve that, still didn't click about that they were, but it started to, like, when people started just passing away, and I talked to him, and he would just be so bummed about it, hearing about his friends dying. I got a message this morning, Bernie, Marsden
from Whitesnake.
But he played in UFO. His first gig was in UFO. I had no idea. 1972, I guess, was his first gig in UFO. When I say, like, the world grieved with me, I get letters. I get messages from fans weekly. I get pictures from people that grew up with him. Oh, here's a picture of your dad and I when we were 16 years old outside of this. And they have a whole story to go with it, and I'm like, tell me more. Cause I can't ask him now, I can't call him up and be like, is this lady crazy? Or, is this lady crazy? Or is tell me, I want to hear your side now. I don't have that. So I'm very grateful for the people that have been so kind to share. I mean, people send me videos and pictures of their guitar lessons that they had with him. When he had his shop downtown, I used to pass there on my way home from work every day.
Was that the Guitar Haven that he was at?
One of them.
There?
Yep. He had two. The Guitar Haven was towards, like, the later times. Yeah. So
where was the other studio down there?
It was off Strawbridge, right where the Kava bar is, right there on the corner. It's like a wine place now, but it used to be called Total Guitars, and he ran that there. Okay. I used to run around downtown all the time as a kid because I'd go to work with him during the summer and just run around. When he would have parties at the house, he would invite his students over to have dinner, and we've had, surgeons, doctors, nurses, producers, people that took lessons from him that did all aspects of different careers, and they would come over and it was a show. He put on a show at home. Like, you could sell tickets to go hang out at Paul's house on the weekend because it was always, he always had the eclectic, and his students reaching out to me about things. Actually, two of his guitar students now teach guitar and other things, but they teach too. And so that's kind of cool to see them. My nephew was taking guitar lessons from one of them after my dad had passed. And so it's just been the small town too. He was here for a while.
Hey, Brittany, seeing that your dad died in June of 2020 and Eddie Van Halen passed away in October of 2020, did your father ever share with you ever meeting Eddie? Any relations with Eddie? I know one's American and Van Halen wasn't too popular over in Europe and it's a different generation, but because of the significance of Eddie Van Halen, you ever share anything?
Not really. Not that I can remember. There was just there was always stories. So sometimes, I should have benefited more as to listening and paying attention to what he was saying about people. But there probably is. I'm not aware. I mean, there was a time where he went to, he loved Pantera. He was a Pantera fan. He was a Dimebag fan, so it was like, him being a fan of somebody's guitar playing was like, okay, that guy's got to be like super, super good if he likes him, type thing. He was a big Dimebag fan. I remember that as well. But I don't remember any Van Halen story. He did actually, I know we're going to speed this up, but his last tour he joined a Swedish band called Killer Bee. And they did a tour with LA Guns and the Bullet Boys. Yeah. And that was I believe it was 2015. And that was the taste that like, I got a taste of my dad being on tour at the time, and I'm an adult now. So now I'm calling the bus driver. I'm like, is he staying hydrated? Yeah. Is everybody eating? Do we need to do anything? Can I send a package somewhere? And they're like, no, he's fine. And I'd call him and I'm like, Dad, you look like you could eat a sandwich. And he's like, leave me alone. This is what I do. And I'm like, okay, just making sure you're taking care of yourself. And we actually got to see them play it was in Georgia. And I got to meet Tracy for the first time. I got to meet
Phil Lewis.
I got to meet Phil Lewis. I got to meet all of them. And that was really cool too. I worked their merch booth.
Oh, that's awesome. Like, and the Bullet Boys, Mark.
Yeah, Mark.
Torn.
What's his name? Yeah, Torn. Yeah, nice guy. Yeah, that was fun because I never got to see my dad in that aspect of. And there was a lot of UFO fans at that show.
A lot of UFO fans everywhere. It's.
I know, but I saw him play with Gator Country, and there were no UFO fans, And then you go to something more his speed, and it was really cool because a lot of the fans there were there to see him, and Killer B was awesome. He loved working with them and touring with them, so that was fun to see. Well, I got to, but I'm glad it was a brief. I don't know how long he could survive on tour again, being that age. I don't even know how old he was at the time, but I would FaceTime him and I'm like, are you eating? Are you drinking water? And he's like, stop.
Did you get the sandwiches I packed, Dad?
Let me take care of you.
I'm going to let John finish this up, but before I go, I just want to ask you, do you have any websites or social media handles to share? Something online, something you put together, a remembrance video of some sort?
Yeah, I did. His Celebration of Life is on YouTube. But he has a guy that named Steve that runs his fan page on Facebook called Paul Chapman fan page. So he's constantly uploading pictures and videos and stories and all sorts of stuff like that. So that's, the Celebration of Life is really cool because you can watch the testimonials from the different, musicians and people that were super important in his life that reached out and sent some beautiful words to tribute to him.
And listeners, if you're out there listening to this and you happen to have an old photo of yourself with Paul or something, send it along to Brittany on Facebook or send it here to Metal Mayhem ROC and we'll send it along to her. That's stuff you can't put a price on. And that's the common thread that's we're celebrating tonight. The love of your dad and the outreach from the metal community. So, Brittany, thank you for spending time with us tonight. I'll let John say goodbye, and we'll definitely stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Brittany. Thank you very much. It was wonderful to see you. I'm glad we were able to get together and talk about your father, Paul. Dearly missed. Great rock and roll guitar legend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Good night.
Metal for Life. Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.